Coogs House. It's a Friday. That means I've talked myself into a win. Let's talk about how.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, and whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater that came to step by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. I appreciate making us your first listen each and every day. If you want to join the conversation but don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below. When grabbing French fries, how many do you grab at a time? Are you like a one at a time person? Are you like a 3, 4, 5? Are you how many can I fit in my hand? Tell us in the comments down below. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. More on that later, but a lot of fun with FanDuel these days, right? It is a Friday. That means folks that are here every week, the everydayers know, but I have always talked myself into a win. I don't care if Houston is playing, I don't know, Kansas City Chiefs this weekend. By every Friday, I have talked myself into a victory. Got to clear my throat there with a little bit of a. I probably shouldn't give free sponsorships out here to whatever I'm drinking on air, right? But, and I want to make sure that I talk through the stakes of this game. I think that there are stakes attached to this one that people, maybe not considering because it's two teams with poor records playing football. I want to talk some about the expectations of this game, the things that I think will happen as Houston plays Kansas on Saturday. But first and foremost, let's talk about that path or those keys to victory. Now, we talked with Derek Johnson of Locked On Jayhawks yesterday. Thought he laid out a couple good things to know about Kansas, so it's a good episode to go listen to as well if you haven't yet. But one thing that struck me, and it kind of verified or validated what I'd seen in watching a couple of their games to get ready for this week, and that is that Kansas had a lot of trouble defending dual threat quarterbacks. And what's fascinating about that is they've, coming into the season, I thought they would have had a really good one, but they've got one of those themselves, but they still have problems defending teams that come in with a true dual threat quarterback. So one of the keys to victory here is that Zeon Chriss has continued to grow and develop and really utilize both of those threats, his arms and his legs. I think part of this is, and honestly, in looking at their roster, their linebackers are probably their weakest unit on the team. I wouldn't say the defensive line is like as good as TCU was either. So I'd say that Houston's played better, but their linebacking core is probably their worst. And, without slights to Rice or, I don't know, UNLV, whoever you want to say, I think that Kansas might have the worst or one of the worst couple of linebacking cores Houston's played against this year. And that leads to teams getting a lot of yards on the ground against them. They lost to Arizona State a couple weeks ago. Arizona State had 309 yards rushing. Obviously, they had like 180 from the Scatabo kid, who's a really good running back out there at Arizona State. But Arizona State's quarterback, who they actually have moved on from since San Levitt, had 77 yards on the ground. TCU had 151 rushing yards. West Virginia had 148. Garrett Green, their quarterback, had 87 of that 148. UNLV had 181. Matthew Sluka had 124 of those 181. Illinois didn't break 80, but as a whole, right, you'll notice that in each of those games, they gave up a lot of yards on the ground, a lot of yards to quarterbacks on the ground. Zeon Chriss needs to take advantage of that. The inverse, consequentially, is Houston's got to do a good job of what I want to call containing the run. Kansas is getting 212 yards rushing per game. And obviously, the defense court, Shieldwood and Willie Fritz are going to try to stop that and get that to 0, right? But they're not going to stop 212 yards. But I will point out that you can contain it to 125 or 145, and that's still like 90 or 70 yards less than the average per game on the ground. And that's an incredibly strong effort and game plan. And so when I say contain the run, I want to make sure that I don't mean to sound like I'm hedging my bets as much as I'm more like setting expectations for like, this is a thing that Kansas does really well. And if you can limit it, it's not unlike playing a team with a dynamic scorer in basketball. Like, hey, if we can keep him to 12 instead of his normal 22, we're doing really good. It's not like he didn't score; it's that he gets a lot less. I feel the same way about Kansas's run game. Their running back, Devin Neal, is really, really good. They run both gap and zone schemes. That's kind of the same. They run like the same split zone kind of concept we talked before about Houston running. But then they also will turn that puller into more of a kick out guy and follow. They do all kinds of window dressing around it, but those kind of the two things that they'll do. He does. Devin Neal does a really good job of pressing the outside of the tackle, even on inside plays. He kind of presses the outside of the box to force flow from linebackers, ultimately trying to cut it back. He still wants to run up between the tackles, but he's trying to pull linebackers outside the box by pressing the edge and then getting back inside underneath it. So you got to make sure you're playing inside out on him. Correct pursuit ankles are going to be important. He's a really good running back. He's a pro. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn there by saying I think they got a pro running back on the roster, which makes the 1-5 record that much more astounding, really. Jalen Daniels is a true dual threat guy, and I think Houston's got to be prepared for him to be the best version of himself because, of course, it'd be our luck that he is, right? And so he is included in this running game thing to me. I know he's had a bad year this year, frankly, more in the passing aspect than the running aspect, but he can turn any rollout, really any play, into an RPO just because he's that kind of an athlete. He has not had the success he's had a couple years ago when Houston played against him, but he still has, when he's on the open field, stride away, get away from you kind of speed, right? The third and final thing I think Houston's got to do to win this game, Houston will do to win this game, is playing. This sounds super silly and obvious, but playing hard until the end of the game. Now, why I bring that up is not just because Coach Wilfred says play through the whistle on a t-shirt he wears to practice all the time, or because it's a mantra that Houston's trying to build themselves around, or whatever. Those are very common tropes in football, right? But Kansas, in all 5 of their losses, has held a lead in the fourth quarter. That's too often to feel random, right? Now, I'm not necessarily saying that they're like, okay, maybe I am kind of saying they choke, but I'm not necessarily saying that they're going to hand Houston the game. Houston's going to make a play or 2 or 4 in that fourth quarter. But I do think that that's too often to be random. And if Houston can stay close or even have a small lead going into the fourth, that ultimately they will have a chance to take the game, just because Kansas has done that to everyone, right? So fool me once, fool me twice. They fooled you 5 times. That's what they do. And Kansas may think they fixed it in the bye week or whatever, but Houston's also had their own bye week to get ready for this game. And I think that whether it's playing at a weird, not really home field, they're in Kansas City, you're an hour away from Lawrence. For what it's worth, I think the other thing that's going to impact home field advantage for Kansas is their big like midnight at Fog or whatever, where they have like a big student celebration around basketball, and the start of basketball practices is like late night, like midnight the night before. And so the idea of like a bunch of college students getting rowdy at midnight and then driving an hour for a game in the middle of the day the next day, I don't know if that's necessary, especially when you say it's like their football team's bad. It's not, they had a bad year so far. I think that they can keep this game close. I don't think the crowd will be as big a factor because of, again, those factors, and then those other factors. And then I just think that Kansas is going to find a way to give this away. Can't tell you what the play is going to look like. I don't know if it'd be giving Houston great field position on a bad punt coverage, and so then Houston's got to capitalize to get the ball in the red zone. I don't know if it'd be a couple bad turnovers or what this case will be, but it feels almost certain that there will be a moment at the end in the fourth quarter of the game where Kansas says, Houston, if you want this, take it. And Houston's got to be close enough to seize the day, carpe diem, and go get that. Now, I want to talk about my expectations in this game and talk about how that's distinctly a little bit different. But before we get to that, I want to talk to you about our new buddies that are giving you a little bit of a boost, because Houston's looking to give themselves a little bit of a boost this season. Kansas could also use a little bit of a boost this season. And if you need a little bit of a boost, it's time to stop worrying about your performance and get Hims. You can feel confident knowing you're getting hard and staying hard whenever you're in the mood. You're up to the peak performance with Hims. Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable health treatments from your couch. The process is 100% online, and there's no need for uncomfortable doctor's visits. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. So your free online visit today at hims.com/locked on. That's HIMS.com/locked on for personal ED treatment options. HIMS.com/locked on. Products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved for or verified for safety and effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Prices vary based on product subscription plans. Parker Ranger Locked on Coogs here, talking about Houston and Kansas this weekend and what my expectations are going into this game. Now, my first thing I put down here was taking notes, jotting to myself as like what I wanted to talk about with my expectations. It's actually kind of both sides of a coin, but work with me here. I think coming off of a bye week, there will be moments in the first quarter that Houston looks rusty. It's natural, it's normal, and frankly, you've got, you're starting Zeon Chriss for only his second start in his time at Houston. A bunch of guys in their first year starting on the offensive line, a bunch of transfers in the first year starting at Houston on the defense. And so you feel like there's going to be just some kind of like, oh, right, we're getting back in the swing of things here. It's also a relatively long road trip. And while you're still in the same time zone, I think that carries some weight too. There's some on or of playing in an NFL stadium, et cetera, et cetera. That said, while I think they will be rusty, I do think you're going to see a very scripted first series or two on offense with a goal to get Zeon Chriss back in rhythm. I felt like his opening series against TCU, not just because they scored, I think it also is due to the fact that they were like just set up for positive play after positive play, did not shoot themselves in the foot, and were able to keep the ball, march the ball down the field, kind of set the tone for Zeon the rest of the day. The goal should be that Houston does that again. Sticking with Zeon, I think Zeon Chriss is going to have at least one, in my notes here, I just say big run. I don't know if that's going to be 30 yards. He had 71 yards against TCU, right? What the case may be, I think he's going to have one big run, oftentimes as a result in touchdowns, right? I don't know if he'll hit 22 miles an hour again. It was 21 point whatever miles per hour again, right? But I do think he's going to have a big run in this game. Kansas has, again, had so much trouble with running quarterbacks and accounting for them as a defense. I feel like his natural inclination is to take off when the second read's not open. I don't know if it'll be a designed run or not. I love when they have the play action-y power, kind of quarterback power kind of stuff where he pump fakes and takes off with his run blocking up in front of him. But I think there's going to be something like that in this ball game. And Houston, after that, is going to need to ride that momentum, right? Big quarterback runs or momentum gaining plays, because it's usually made like based off of some gigantic like defensive folly, right? It's this thought that the defense didn't account for the sixth potential ball carrier, because for so many traditional pass first offenses, that there was a statue, right? So I think that Houston has to ride that momentum, and riding that momentum may determine the outcome of the game, whether or not they can do it. But I feel confident that Zeon Chriss will get a big run. I'd imagine this game is close into the late third quarter. Frankly, so was Iowa State. We saw that one went. But I think both teams will be kind of in the teens, maybe even hovering around 20, 24 points at that point of the game. Both defenses let's be honest. I think Houston's defense is a lot better than Kansas's, but both defenses probably play better than the offenses early because coming off of bye weeks, a little bit of rusty kind of play there. Defense is a lot more about reaction. Offense is a lot more about timing. But I do think that both offenses will have success against the opposing defense, in part because Kansas defense has vulnerable points. And then I'm just betting that Jalen Daniels is, because it'd be Houston's luck, a better version of himself that I think is going to be better than he's been all year, just because that's how this would work out. Right? That's just how everything works out. That's just how this would work out. He's got a weird gut feeling about that one. Hope I'm wrong. Right. And then individually, it talks about Zeon in the offense. I think Carlos Allen's about to have a big game. Carlos Allen is the big man up front, nose tackle for Houston. I will point out that I think that this is the best center he has played. His name is Bryce Foster. Big kid in Kansas. I actually don't know where he's from. He's listed at 6'5", 330, which is really big for a center. Centers are usually the shortest guy in the offensive line. 6'5", 330 is huge. But I think what's been great to watch about Carlos has been Carlos Allen has kind of stepped his game up every time the competition level has stepped up. One of his best games was Oklahoma, right? SEC environment. He played well against TCU. He's played big against Iowa State. I think that he's the kind of ball player that ultimately, I don't mean to say he's a gamer, like he doesn't work hard or things. I think that can have negative connotations, but I do think he's a gamer in that his best games are against the best competition. At least that's what his 6 games has been like at Houston. And so I would anticipate playing another really good football player that Carlos Allen brings it. Part of that is because Keith Cooper will demand a double team where he is. And, Michael Batten will be honestly someone they're going to keep their tabs on and be calling out where he is at all times. Whenever he comes on a dog blitz, everyone gets a one-on-one all of a sudden and so on. But I think Carlos Allen has a good game in this game. As far as what that all adds up to for Houston, I'm predicting another 31-24 victory for Houston. I say another victory, 31-24 for Houston. I do think, like I said, that run game at Kansas is strong. I think it'll be Houston's luck that it's as strong as it's been all year and kind of their best offensive output from a guy like Jalen Daniels on the season. I just think Houston's got too many ways to take advantage of let's call a spade here. Too many ways to take advantage of a bad defense in Kansas. They've got a decent DB that is suited up, but they've got a backup DB across from him at the other corner spot because of injuries. They've got, again, not great linebacker play. They got decent D linemen in front of them, but I don't mean to belittle last year's team too much, but we saw what a good D-line and bad linebacker play could do a year ago, right? And so on the whole, I think Houston takes advantage and whatever the case may be in the fourth quarter when it's a close game, 24-20 or 24-21 or something, something happens and Houston gets a chance to bust it open, and I think they'd take it. And that creates a 2-game win streak for Houston. And I think that's actually part of what the stakes of this game are. We'll talk about in a second. But that's a big deal. And I don't necessarily understand why Houston's been a dog by a touchdown all week. I think we're down to about 5.5 on FanDuel last I checked. But I do think it's interesting that, Houston it's not a lot more wins, but Houston's the team with more wins under their belt. And Kansas was favored at the early part of the week. It's like 6.5, 7.5. It's like, whoa. And so I think that, maybe I'm trying to check myself. I guess I wanted to be a lot more excited, have a lot more grandiose expectations, but I'm also trying to be like, okay, I still think they're going to win because I do that by every Friday, but like, what am I looking at here? And I think part of it is that people expect Jalen Daniels to get back on track following their bye week, I guess. We'll see. Now, there are stakes attached to this game that I think people need to really make sure they're considering as we talk about it going into the weekend. But before we get to that, we got to talk to you a little bit about putting stakes in your own game, and that is what you can do with our buddies over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now you can get a big return whenever you get that hunch in the middle of a game or you want to check the latest stats, if you like play-by-play. All of that happens on the same exact page as you can place your bets. You start with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. You can place your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Parker Andrew here at Locked On Cougs, breaking down Kansas and Houston in football this weekend. And again, I think Houston's got a chance to win this game. I think there's a real clear path to victory. I think Houston can take advantage of some things that Kansas does not do well. But also, before we get too far, I think that we got to remember this game, like every game, has its own unique stakes attached to it. For instance, winning this game would be a second consecutive win for Houston, and Houston's not won back-to-back games since they left the American Athletic Conference 2 years ago. They haven't won back-to-back games on the road since then either, and I think that that seems silly and small, but I also think that getting even a 2-game win streak put together is the kind of incremental progress you hope to see even as we strip it down to rebuild it this year, right? It's weirdly an important milestone, and I think it's because it has a bye week in the middle of it, kind of feels choppy, or the TCU game feels so long ago, so played on a Friday of that week also, or whatever. But on the whole, 2 games in a row, to winning 2 games in a row is a big deal. Again, I would never tell the players or coaches to look ahead, but as a guy that talks to a microphone every night, I can. They play Utah next week. Utah is spiraling. Can you ride the second one into a third one and build and so on and get some momentum going, get some snowballing? That starts with a win this weekend. And I think that has to start at some point in the Willie Fritz era, right? And I didn't know that I'd be talking about having this early in the Willie Fritz era, but we're here, and I think there's a real chance it happens. And I think it's also worth pointing out that I mentioned the last segment that Kansas has been favored all week long, and their home team, technically, it's being played in Kansas City, but they're the home team, so I kind of get that. But nationally, I don't think people are going to care about that. I think anyone gives a rip that Kansas is favored at home. Kansas is 1-5 and has been a visible disappointment. There were people picking them as a dark horse Big 12 championship contender, and they can't beat an FBS team yet. Houston losing to Kansas, being the first FBS team that Kansas beat, is a negative type of attention on Houston's football program. And I don't know that people would care nationally that Houston was, the underdog in Las Vegas. I think people would look at it as embarrassing that you lost to a bad football team. Doesn't matter what the odds were beforehand. People may not care about that. You may not care about it as a listener. I certainly do, because frankly, I worry about how that translates into the visibility of the program and the recruits you're talking to, and who knows if there's some Midwesterner kids trying to get from the area where Willie Fritz grew up there in Kansas, Missouri, and all of that, or someone that's debating between schools or what have you. You don't want that kind of negative pub as you're building at any point, but certainly as you're building a program. And I think people are going to be more focused on the fact that you lost to a bad Kansas team, the fact that Kansas was favored, and there are reasons to point out that Kansas lost a bunch of close games this year and is a weird 1-5 team and yada, yada, yada. People aren't going to care about that. They're going to say you lost to 1-5 Kansas, and that's where their sentence is going to stop. I think there's a weird amount of pressure in this game, too, for Willie Fritz playing in his hometown state area. He's got ties to both Kansas and Missouri. And obviously he's made a big deal of recruiting the greater Houston area and not taking a plane to his recruit trips because he wants to make sure kids are from close enough and he's got enough talent, frankly, in the area. He doesn't have to. If you ever wanted to expand that footprint beyond greater Houston area and some parts of Louisiana, the next natural place for Willie would be this part of the world. He's from here. He's mentioned in his press conference on Monday, I think it was Monday, that he's going to have a lot of his family there and a lot of family friends and old college teammates and so on. And he wasn't shy about saying they're probably also going to be wearing Jayhawk blue because that's what they grew up rooting for or whatever, right? But that puts a weird amount of pressure on this game. And frankly, it kind of transitioned me into my last point here. That's a weird kind of pressure that you just want to shake off early and get rid of and never have to deal with again. And Houston's 0-4 against Kansas all time. Now, it's just 4 games, but it weirdly feels like because of the state of the program when Houston entered the Big 12, and frankly, this brewing basketball rivalry the two schools are striking up because they're both very nationally relevant in that right now. And whatever the case may be, it feels like these two schools are going to be linked in more ways than just being, quote, Big 12 schools. If you ask my honest opinion, I think it's because most people see at a national level the two schools as basketball schools that play football, not the opposite, right? And so being connected with Kansas is certainly one thing. But the other part of that is if you're 0-4 in this constant connection, you continue to go over, that's a bad thing. That's a bad look. I would point out that, it wasn't certainly the last straw, but a straw in the firing of the last head football coach actually kind of came out of his loss to Kansas in 2022. Now, they didn't fire him in the 2022-23 offseason, obviously, although I've got plenty of people that comment on videos saying they should have. But losing that weird rain game where the rain came and the lightning kind of delayed or put a big pause in the middle of the game and delayed the finish of the game, and ultimately switched a lot of momentum in that game. I don't know if you remember, but it was in Houston and back in the fall of 2022, and Jalen Daniels was really good in that game. That was used as hey, this program is not ready for the Big 12 kind of data point. And rightly or wrongly, that kind of carried with Houston throughout the next year. You heard people reference it. It's like, well, and they lost to so-and-so, lost to so-and-so, and they hadn't played them this year, lost to Kansas last year, and so on. And so shaking that off is important as well. And frankly, it would signify a big step forward from the last guy. Now, I am a big fan of this Willie Fritz hire. I mentioned my only concern early on was like, how long is he going to be at Houston for? And the longer, the better. I think he's a great football coach in a lot of areas. I also been open up front about this being a rebuilding season, right? The first job when you rebuild a program is you got to get the people off the bus that shouldn't be there and the people on the bus that should be there. And then you got to get the bus going in the right direction. Got to get in the right seats. And then you got to get the bus going the right direction, right? And early in that process, he's still getting people in and out of the program that do and don't need to be there, right? He got some good guys in. Lost some guys out that didn't want to be part of the rebuild or didn't fit the culture or whatever. And so that's going to mean that this year you do take some lumps. I don't mean to say that. But if in the year you're taking those lumps, you can beat a Kansas program that even if it's just symbolically the same, set of laundry, the same uniforms and helmets that the last guy could not beat, I think that's a good sign. I think that's kind of part of the reason that the TCU win felt so good, honestly, is that the last guy was not just unable to beat those purple people eaters, but also was one of them, right? He's sitting over, he wanted the game, but he is employed by them technically now, right? And so continuing to separate yourself from that, I think is really, really important. Now, if you think I'm missing something or what have you, find me on X, Painge with 512. Watch the game, obviously, live. Talking about it all day on X as well. Saturday, we'll be live after the game. Still working out if we're going to be on Locked On Houston Sports or Locked On Coogs, so make sure you subscribe. Hit the bell so you know when we're live, and I'll be here to break it down then. And then also, starting Monday, getting into football and more basketball, and who knows when big recruiting news could be coming, dun 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 dun, or whatever with all of that. Lots of things going on here at Locked On Coogs each and every day. Locked On Coogs is a prime member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.